Welcome, everyone, to today's roundtable, which is going to be focused on a very important issue, which is women's entrepreneurship in ag and food tech. I'm one of the co-moderators, Shalaka Joshi, and it is my pleasure to welcome this amazing group of speakers to discuss, I think, many aspects of what life looks like for them as entrepreneurs, and also how they've, I think, built very strong success stories as entrepreneurs, as stakeholders in ag tech, and as really role models in India. So huge and warm welcome. Thank you everyone for joining. What we're going to do is actually, I'll spend a couple of minutes just setting the stage, so to speak, on women's entrepreneurship in India, and then we'll do a quick round of introductions. In terms of the panel sort of layout, we're going to have quite a few questions that my co-moderator Raman and I will share with our panelists, and then we'll open it up to the audience for some time. So we will have the opportunity to have a robust discussion with you, not in person, much as we would have liked to, but at least virtually. All right, so let me actually kick it off by trying to set the stage a little bit in terms of women, India, and agribusiness. I think, it's no surprise to the audience here that women are crucial stakeholders in agribusiness value chains all around the world, right? So I think one of the IFC studies showed that they comprise 40 to 50% of the agricultural workforce. In India, female employment in agriculture in 2020 stands at about 54%. But much of this work is sort of invisible and the contribution is undervalued. That's on the employment side. On the entrepreneurship side, women-owned businesses make up for only 10% of all the MSMEs in the country. Access to finance is a key barrier to growth for women-owned businesses. So 90% of finance requirements for women-owned businesses in MSMEs as a segment are met through informal sources. So that's sort of the second pillar that we're talking about, which is entrepreneurship in women-owned businesses. The opportunity that we want to get a little bit deeper into is what is the opportunity to unlock gains and add to our GDP, particularly using ag tech for India. So by advancing women's equality in India, we stand to unlock significant gains and potentially add almost $770 billion to our annual GDP by 2025. This is the size of multiple economies, including, say, Germany and Austria. It's a staggering number. And so that's sort of the third pillar that we will be trying to tease out during the course of the next hour and a half. So with that, we'll start with our first question that we're using really as a way of introducing ourselves. So the question is, at its core, in our view, what is the problem really that we're trying to solve, and how does your work contribute to it? So I'll take the opportunity to answer it by way of introducing myself, which is at its core, the problem that I'm working on is gender equality in the private sector in South Asia. I have the pleasure of serving as the gender lead for the IFC across South Asia. And the IFC is the world's largest development finance institution that is focused on working with the private sector in emerging markets. We do a number of things to work with our partners and clients to increase financing for women, but also to build the capacity of the private sector in using a gender lens. So that's me, and I'll turn over, let me start alphabetically, to you, Anjali, to give us an introduction of your perspective on the issue. Over to you, Anjali.
Thank you, Shalaka, and thank you to Raman and ThinkAg for convening this. I'm Anjali Bansal. I work with Avana Capital, Avana Group actually, and I also sit on several boards, public boards where I chair some of the CSR committees, and I'm quite involved with policy and policy making through the NITI Aayog platform and other initiatives. Shalaka, following your lead, I will share a little bit of the work we do in gender. So Avana itself is a gender smart 2X platform. We seek to promote the cause of gender inclusion and diversity. So not just gender, but all diversity and inclusion in everything we do through our equity funds, through our the work we do on the credit side, as well as on capacity building through Avana Connect. We work extensively and deeply with the Niti Aayog Women Entrepreneurship Platform to support more women and more entrepreneurs in their journeys, both not just in the startup context, but also bringing more women into supply chains, as well as providing more access to capital. As a CSR leader in several companies, on the boards of several companies, gender and again, diversity and inclusion is a very significant agenda item, and a fair amount of both strategic bandwidth as well as resource allocation goes to promoting the cause of gender in supply chains, particularly in some of the agricultural communities that our companies are involved with. I will pause there. And should I just turn over to next on the alphabetic order?
Sure, that would be Devleena. Thanks, Anjali.
Everybody, thank you, Anjali. To think Angela and Raman to organize this. Sorry, I'm in a bad network. I'm actually currently based out of rural Maharashtra, working for the community. I'm going to switch off my video, but because might just interrupt my audio as well. So as a little introduction, I'm Devleena, a CEO and founder of Numerate. At Numerate, we are currently addressing the problems of traceability, sustainability of the seafood supply chain, along with the profitability and climate vulnerability of small and medium-scale fishers. And this might come across sounding a lot, but what we have realized while working in the sector is that if we can just solve the basic problem of how to incentivize fisher folks to do sustainable fishing, it helps us piece the rest of the.
Devleena, we seem to have lost you. So let me just check if you can come back in. Hi. And if not, then I'll invite. Hi, Devleena. Can you hear us?
So, sorry, did you guys lose me?
Yes, we lost the last sentence, just the last sentence. And so I'll hand it back over to you.
Okay, sorry. So I was basically saying we use multiple kinds of data to really build an end-to-end supply chain to support not only the fisher folks, but also the seafood and drive the, the thought of traceability and sustainability in the entire supply chain. The three key areas we're focusing is, or the problem that we're solving, I think that was one of the questions, is we see the fisher folks are increasingly seeing, high cost in their day-to-day operations owing to climate change. And this is not only for seafarers, but also for the entire supply chain. The second thing is we see that they have a big dilemma.
I think we've lost you again, Devleena. So what I'll suggest is if you could just try dialing back in, maybe that might be a better connection. And I'll pass the baton over to Ezel to do her introduction in the meantime, and then we'll come back to you. Yeah? Over to you, Ezel.
Hi, Shalika. Hi, Raman. Thanks so much for having and pulling together this panel. I think a very, very relevant topic for discussion, even though we're in 2020. So I am Azil, part of an early stage startup in Bangalore called String. And String is in the business of producing sustainable food, particularly protein sources. That's kind of our core focus. And so we are a very technology heavy startup in the ag-food space, right? So for me, this whole topic, the fundamental challenge that I see is running a startup in the ad space. I'm sure we'll get to it. One of the aspects is on the technology side, right? In terms of the enabling such kind of technologies to come to market in India. In terms of women, the fundamental challenge I see is, given that we are a company in Bangalore in the technology space, you're already talking about women that are at the higher end of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? They're not talking about food, we're not talking about safety, we're talking about how else to enable them. And I feel like actually the fundamental challenge that a lot of women have to even stay in technology space, let alone think about entrepreneurship, even to continue to be engaged, is actually twofold. I think the infrastructure for them to be able to do that is not there. For running a company in Bangalore, I can say, folks, it's very easy for us to engage folks at the early part of the career. But when you're talking about middle managers in technology, in ag tech, they have difficulty in trying to stay in the workforce, right? And only if we fix that problem will we have more entrepreneurs then emerging, because now you have folks who have the sufficient depth in this to then be able to carry and bring forward new technological innovation. So that's how I see it. I'll say that, and then I'm sure we can get into a deeper discussion around this.
Great. Thanks so much, Ezel. And then let me turn it over to my wonderful co-moderator, Raman.
Thanks, Shalaka, and thank you very much to all of you for being part of this wonderful conversation. ThinkAg is a very young platform that is working to enable faster adoption of technology in the food and ag space. It's a not-for-profit platform, and that's a very important element to recognize, because it's not looking at valuations or it's not looking at revenue generation. It's looking at creating collaborations and partnerships. And this kind of a dialogue really is a large contributor to those kind of partnerships to enable that to happen. So that's really a quick overview of ThinkAg. Really thankful to Shalaka and IFC for being part of this, and to the others who've given their time, and welcome to all the participants. A quick background on what we see going forward. So really, we believe that, given the background that Shalaka has given on the role of women in food and ag, we see that this space is going to become very, very interesting for technology players. It's become more open in the last 3 years. We see next 5 years becoming very sharp divides on who's doing what. Some people are doing platform approach. Some people are doing very specific deep dives into technology areas. And they will be integrators as well, system integrators. So there is role for everybody, and we believe that women bring a very, very unique and holistic perspective to this space, and there is an urgent need to support that agenda in a structured manner, and that's what we are trying to do here at ThinkAg, to make sure everybody is on the same plane. So I'll stop here, and we will continue the conversation as the questions come up. Over to you, Simone.
Yes, thanks, Raman. Thank you for having me on this panel. My name is Simone. I'm founder and CEO of Plantix. And the question what Plantix is solving, we actually support farmers to increase their yield. So helping them analyzing on. Let's make it practical. You are in the field, you see that your plant is not looking good, and then you can use your smartphone, open Plantix, make a picture of the ill plant, and we analyze and give you back an answer what is wrong with your plant. So we use AI, we train machine learning algorithms to analyze plant diseases, nutrient deficiencies, and pests. So we make, actually we train digital experts to be with the farmer when it's needed the most. So when they are in the emergency room and see that something is wrong with their harvest, with their plants, where they put money in, where they spend time, and where they rely on to get the harvest in the end, at the end of the season, into their pocket. That's the one thing. We have more than 50 million downloads. 80% of them are coming from India. The rest is coming from all over the world. Next step where we work on, we open up, or we are not only an app anymore, but building an ecosystem, an agriculture ecosystem where we include the retailers as well. So we connect the farmer to the retailer and make sure that they really buy the right product in the end at the retailer level. So we included now already 30,000 retailers all over India becoming part of our network. So we connect them with the farmers, but we also make sure we supply them with the right inputs from manufacturers. And this on an digital way with an app for the retailers as well. So making all the value chain more transparent here and more accessible. Our office is an indoor. I'm happy that most of our team is now situated in India. And I think with the discussion we have here and women in the value chain, I think ICT tools can play a really important role in this, since what we can do with ICT tools is actually available for everyone, right? And accessible all the time. So it doesn't mean you have to have face-to-face conversation when you want to have access to knowledge. And I think that's opened up a lot of things where, I mean, normally this knowledge is situated with MENS and transmitted through MENS, but with an ICT tool, women do not have to face these issues anymore. So they can just, when they have a smartphone, I mean, that's something, but I think it becomes more and more achievable and more normal in society, particularly also among farmers. Then there's a totally new world opening up for them. And it's just our, I think, task to bring the knowledge to them that they know where they can access it. Yes, so that's from my side so far.
Thank you, Simone. And let's go into rural India to see if Devlina has dialed back in. Devlina, let's try this again.
Hello, Shalaka. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Thank you so much.
Great. Sorry for the interruption. So I think I will just complete what I was saying. So, the three major problems that we're focusing currently is making, fisher folk on a daily basis, making their journey to the sea and making their selling of the fish to the market profitable. The second bit that we are focusing is, making sure that they have around the topic of profitability, they have access to, higher sales margin, and with that, their realization of payments are faster. And with all of these, what we are currently also exploring now is connectivity to microfinances and micro insurance, which we typically see lacking in the fishing sector, since the fishing sector is considered as a high risk. So where we come in as a data platform is the fact that we have not only their data, but we also have the weather data. We also have any other kind of supporting data. We're able to, really analyze their credit worthiness and, showcase it to financial institutions and insurance providers that there are ways to really overcome the risks that is typically associated with the sector. Just a point on the current session of today. 1/3 of the fishing society consists of women, and there are both direct and indirect contributors. And we see them both in capture and culture fisheries, as in the marine sector and in the land sector. And their contributions, even if they don't go out fish, to fish every day, but the fact that from the time the fish comes to the shore, everything and anything from the selling, auctioning, cleaning, packaging, by making derivative products or bottling, everything is supported by them. So we are able to really help them or help extend the markets to women in the fishing society. And in the last few months of COVID, we have seen it more more prevalent to what we do, since a lot of such has really made us aware of the fact that the work can be done from home. So it is an awareness that we can also wake up to, where we were to provide them easy tools to really build products while from the comforts of the home, and bring them to be part of the supply chain at large.
Excellent. That's you've all touched already, I think, on some of the opportunities and some of the issues that are, that you have to navigate in agtech in India. So I was wondering if we can actually continue to deepen setting the stage by doing a quick round robin of how would you rank the issues sort of hindering progress in agtech for women entrepreneurs, right? So if I picked 5 things, for example, money or financing, information, by which we mean data, technology, which we've already seen, I think, some evidence of in terms of people's access to technology, and in particular women's access to technology, or adoption, meaning education for the end user to actually adopt those tools or other things. So if you were to conduct sort of a quick round robin in this group of saying, what would you rank as the top challenge for you in the context of your work, and what would you rank as sort of the bottom? So I'll actually start again alphabetically and ask Anjali to step in, and then we will do the same thing, and then I'll reverse it the next time, I promise. Anjali, over to you.
Sure. So Shalaka, I will think a little bit broadly. So at Avana Fund, we look at business models that take technology-led innovation and drive large impactful outcomes. And one of the impactful outcomes we actually look for is gender inclusion. So one sees a lot of this. From a women entrepreneurs, and I'm not talking about your classical startup, but the average rural semi-urban woman who is participating in agriculture, as well as the startups. I think one of the big constraints is money. So I would start with finance or access to financing and capital, and both equity as well as debt financing. There is still some equity capital available from friends and family. There is very, very little debt available in the formal credit system, whether it is public sector banks or it is actually agri-based NBFCs or banks. And I'm leaving microfinance out of this, so not microcredit. So credit and equity capital. Second would be knowledge and access to knowledge resources, so expertise, internally or externally for them. And the third would be definitely digital and technology. I mean, there is massive digitization that has happened in India and is continuing to happen, but women tend to fall on the other side of the divide.
Great, thank you. Devleena, if I could call on you next to comment on what
Sure.
you see as the top gap and maybe even the top opportunity, including perhaps commenting on the relevance and adaptability of technology for India, which I know is something you've
Sure.
never done before.
Sure. So I would generally say that, and I'm talking about the fisherwomen, typically sticking to the sector that we work with. So I would say the first thing that I believe is for the women folks to be aware of their contribution. The fact that they are already contributing to a very large amount in this specific sector, and the fact that they do have decision-making powers. So I first choose information and self-awareness. The second I would say is capacity building, where they need to know what is within their reach that can be harnessed. This can be just forming focus groups and support groups, whereas a collective, they can be for decision-making process, and they can enable decision-making process. So that's the second thing that I would say. The third, of course, is the access to funding, and this goes along with the regulation and schemes and governance and everything that kind of switches to. Fourth, I would say, is the technology, as easy as mobile penetration, access to, some kind of what we do, providing them, transactions, analysis, traceability. But all these are something that can only happen.
I think we've lost Devleena, unfortunately. So I will turn this question over to Ezel, and we'll come back to Devleena again.
I think Devleena just joined back.
Hi, Devleena, can you hear us? We lost the last half sentence.
Okay.
All right, we'll turn it over to you, Ezel, and then we'll come back to Devleena at the end.
Yeah. So just speaking on a slightly, hello. Yeah. So just so I'm talking about more your urban women in technology, and one of the things that I notice is that when we talk about technology, right? So particularly, let's say since we're talking about ag, if you talk about biotech, I see that in most colleges that we interact with, there's at least 50 or 60% women in the classroom in a biotech class. But when I see the workforce and being able to actually hire women for technology workforce, it is extremely difficult for us to actually be able to maintain that gender diversity at work. So I would say that one of the first challenge, of course, I think is financing for technology itself in India is a challenge. And when you add women in that, I think the problem just, is magnified exponentially. The second, I believe, is actually infrastructure. Infrastructure for women to be able to stay in the workforce, right? Again, just to elaborate a little, if you talk about the women that I interact with, these are women, for whom the basic needs are already met. And they are two kinds of women. Either if they have the capability to leave India and go to another ecosystem where they can continue to work in technology space, then they do that. Now, for folks who don't have the capability to do that and who are in India, they start off in the workforce, but after, maybe like a 5-year time frame, they drop off. And so perhaps the infrastructure, maybe even regulation to support women, like let's say in a city like Bangalore, I can tell you it's probably, if you look for daycare centers that are open from 8 to 6, it's probably 0. So if you can have regulations that says every city needs to have a daycare center for every 15-mile radius, I think that can help more women be engaged in technology over a longer part of their careers.
Great point.
In technology,
yeah, great point, Azil. And I'll share that I think the India is one of the few middle income economies where our female labor force is actually declining, right? And we really have quite a large gap in terms less of recruitment of women, but more retention and promotion of women. And so childcare and family care responsibilities are indeed one of the levers that I think we would have to engage with as a nation in order to make sure we don't miss out on this crucial workforce and the gains that the GDP can also get by engaging with them. There's some work that we've done on analyzing how the private sector can support employer-supported childcare. And so, just a plug there, there's a bunch of research that the IFC has done around the case for employer-supported childcare. It's available online if anyone wants to look into it. And we do have an India-specific study as well that analyzed it as one of the key levers for women to stay in the workforce. So very well received, I think, insights there. Over to you, Simone.
Yes, I think I go back again to the end consumer, as Devalina also talked about. So, and I can just underline what she said, that one of the most important thing is actually capacity building on the farmer side, and particular for women. What we see is that it's still, really need to advertise that we have a tool for farmers, since a lot of them only know a smartphone as a communication tool. Means they use it for WhatsApp, they use it for YouTube and to call or to write SMS, but not really as a working tool which can solve problems for them, right? So it's really that we need to educate and bring to the table that there is something which can support their daily life in farming. And I think particular, most of them are first-time smartphone users, first-time access to the internet. So a lot of education on this side, information on this side would help a lot. Just make them aware of that. This open a new world, right? And they can really use it to support their lives, to get more money out of what they are living from, what is their work, and that it's not only for communication in the end. So I think that's an important step. What is really nice that we have the capacity, we have connectivity on the fields in rural India, so much better than it is here in Germany, to be honest. So that's the first step in terms of infrastructure. And I think also in terms of price for mobile data, this is available and this is affordable, more or less for most of them. We have smartphones which are cheap enough. So at least we find a smartphone in every family, at least. So that's given. But then really, making them more tech savvy is a big step we need to take. And I think schools could be really a useful place for this already. Working with children really early on to use smartphones as a companion, to use this is the laptop, more or less, because that's what it is, right? In a lot of families, you do not have laptops or PCs anymore, but you go directly into using a smartphone for accessing the internet. And if we overcome this point, I think it can be really, really big support and an eye-opener and empowering for women as well.
Thanks. And I'm wondering if I can ad-lib off that to one of the questions that's come in on the chat by Yashu Shrestha, which is talking a little bit about how the ag tech industry can tackle a digital divide around digital empowerment and education in India. And for women, the digital gender gap is actually very, very vast in India, which means that even if there is smartphone penetration in households, there are power dynamics within the household where women may not be able to use those mobile phones or may not have enough time to use the mobile phones, etc. And so I was wondering how any of you might have engaged with this and how you're thinking about this from the end user perspective, right? Like what really would need to be done to deepen the digital empowerment and the digital access for farmers as well as for women in India. So open question if anybody would like to jump in.
I think it's said if in school it's already the awareness that this is something everyone can access and should play around with. And it's not like giving from father to the son, but it's really a topic everyone talks about, might help already. And then I think, yeah, particular when communities gather or anyway, I think we are not in the position to really be on the ground and doing a lot of workshops, since that's one of our point. We are a more digital driven company. But in this moment, really putting the focus on it and say like, okay, when women's gathering, technology is nothing what men are only doing, but this is something we do, and we want to have access to and demanding these access.
Thank you.
Shalaka, if I may use an example.
Please.
And actually look back to see if there are some lessons from what has worked. So if we, and some of us who have been involved with this will know that 20 years ago, access to credit was a huge issue. And then the creation of the joint liability group and the SFGs and so on created a pooled resource that women could access. And today we are seeing something very interesting and something similar in terms of digital access for women. The mobile, the smartphone, whether it is KaiOS or whatever, it's seldom an iPhone, but it's an Android or KaiOS device, is actually the device for access. For rural and lower income families, it's their digital device. And usually it is one device per family. Sometimes it is one device for a cluster of families even. So consequently, it is a shared device. Now, there are power dynamics in a family. So it may be, and right now it may be used for education of the child, it may be used for communication. And so the woman generally has the last access to it. One way to solve for it is if this device can get converted to a means of livelihood, not a means of communication. And we did this at Seva Bank, when the mobile loan was introduced, it was one of the best selling loan items. Because for a vegetable vendor, her mobile phone and the old Nokia, that 1,000 rupee phone, was her device for livelihood. It was her shop. And so the mobile device today for agri and rural and women is actually a means of livelihood. And perhaps there are credit products that can be introduced to support the purchase of a shared device, either in a family or a group of women agri entrepreneurs. So just one thought.
That's such an interesting idea, and I think such an elegant way of potentially addressing this, right? So because as we know, I think anyway smallholder farmers tend to have limited access to formal credit, and that really limits and can limit their capacity to invest in inputs that are required to improve crop yields or productivity. Right. And for female farmers, this is quite a staggering gap in terms of accessing financial services. And there is a real opportunity, as you rightly pointed out, for disruptive technology to help improve lending for female smallholder farmers. I was curious about whether we have any experiences or insights here around working with female farmers. So is there any difference in consumer behavior that solution providers should be aware of to provide better service to women farmers? And I'm wondering, Ezel, if, is there anybody who might like to step in on this?
Not directly, actually, unfortunately, but I think what Anjali just proposed is an excellent idea, because one of the things that I have noticed is, if you do, let's say, if you do give a cell phone to the women in the household, right, the lower income, next time you see them, they don't have it. Somebody else in the household has taken it away from them. Right, so I think attaching that livelihood to that digital is actually a great way to lock in, because they come under the lower end of the totem pole at home. They really need to be able to figure out how to break past that barrier, right? So and yeah, I think that's actually a great a great way to lock that in, if something that like that can be feasible. In terms of our personal experience, for me personally, Shalaka, not so much dealing directly with farmers, since we are more on the input side. So in the agri sector itself, for example, we have a technology platform that allows us to manufacture cleaner, better agricultural inputs that can then really help increase your productivity per acre. So we are not directly dealing with the farmer, but our end user is actually, an educated English-speaking agriculturist who's helping the farmer then decide what needs to be used on their farm itself. But in the circle, the only thing that I would say is, I spent pretty much about 14 years in the US. And then one thing I see in terms of a distinct difference is that in the circle that I'm in, whereas in the Western ecosystem, 80% of women were working. In the Indian ecosystem, even though I think the ratio itself is reversed, right? You have about 20% of the workforce and 80% managing the household. And yeah, we talked about it, how to actually break past that, whether it's at the higher end of the income sector or at the lower end of the income sector, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I mean, there's also the invisibility of some work, right? So actually, we were working with DC and Sriram on, supporting smallholder women farmers. And the early questions that we were asking around the existence of women in the supply chain, the obvious answer was no, there are no women in the supply chain. And it's only when you got deeper that and you were on the field, that you realize actually women are doing a lot of the actual physical labor. It's just invisible. So the capacity building there and the partnership there was really around saying, how do we provide the training and the visibility to the women to sort of move up the value chain, right? Whether it's teaching them how to operate machinery, or whether it is in a certain cultural context, making people be more comfortable with the idea of both genders working together in the field or whatever, right? So there were a number of innovations that we were able to bring in there. And I'm just using that as an example to say that a lot of this work is not even really visible, particularly in a country like ours. There's so much global expertise on this panel, and I would love to hear more about what are global technological advances that you are excited about in terms of something that could solve an important agricultural problem in, say, 2021. Is there anything that stands out to you that you're excited about, in particular if it's adaptable for India? I mean, we've been reading a lot about how effectively technology can be leveraged in agricultural extensions here, for example. And I'm just curious about what each of you is excited about for the year coming up in terms of global advances that you might like to even see here. So open question if anybody would like to volunteer.
I'll jump in. For me, what the shock and the surprise is that it's 2020 and India as a country still has not taken a clear stance on genetically modified plants, right? And when you talk about agriculture and when you talk about agricultural productivity, it actually is a key component of the equation. Because one end we can talk about, how does a farmer manage the farms itself better, and what kind of technologies can be brought in there. How do we actually get better at the farm to fork, and how do we actually reduce wastage there? But there is a significant aspect of this that we're missing out is how do we actually better the input that is getting into the farmer, right? When we talk about climate impact, how do we reduce the excessive use of fertilizers? How do we actually help the farmer manage the inputs better? And a key component of that is what is India's stance on genetic modification, right? I mean, today US approved genetically modified pigs for making food and drugs. You don't have to be at that end of the spectrum. But I think as a country, we need to have a very open approach to technological innovation like this, because this is definitely where the world is headed, right? We're talking about lab-grown food, we're talking about clean meat, and I think we're already a little late to the game. You know, Singapore just approved its first cell culture chicken. So I think it's very important for India as a country to get clarity on regulations in this sector for sure.
Thanks, Cyril. I think Devlina, you were going to come in as also on this.
Yes, I'm hoping you guys can hear me.
Yes, clearly. Thanks, Devlina.
Okay, so I just mention this thing about at least the fishery sector. We see a lot of innovations happening in the farming sector. We're talking about genetically advanced farming, but when it comes to the fishery sector, basic safety in the sea has not been addressed so far. What I'm particularly excited about is having a simple device which will help fisher folks while they're out in the sea, while they're battling severe weather conditions, where they are even unaware of what weather condition is about to hit them in the next 5 days, because they spend more than 10 days or 15 days in the sea. So that is what we are currently trying. And as I said, if I really have to compare farming and fishing, there is very little.
Devlina, we lost you. So the last sentence was farming and fishing.
Yeah, so basically I was saying if you really farming and fishing has very little access to innovation, and that's what really excites me to bring little innovations that helps them a lot to the everyday supply chain activities.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, well, let's shift gears a little bit and try and tell a few more stories that are directly relevant to each of you. So I would love to invite you to tell us a little bit about sort of a day in the life of, right? You're all very successful entrepreneurs. You have built very, very strong businesses and funds. What is it like to start your own business? Walk us through a day in your shoes, perhaps when you've just started out being the founder CEO of an agri-tech company or a fund. What are some trends and highlights that you noticed during your journey as an entrepreneur? Let's start with Simone this time around.
I think what I totally underestimated how much of a roller coaster an entrepreneur life is. I think from the outside, it looks always so shiny. So you become an entrepreneur, you build your company, but I think what most are missing, or no one is talking about, that there are a lot of downhill rides, let's put it like this, and where you have to be really brave and say like, all right, it's not working. I have absolutely no clue how I should solve this, and just sitting there without any clue, because I think for most of us, it's the first time that we are building a business, right? It's not that we learned this in school, or we did this the 10th time or something like this. So I think so that's one thing, but on the other hand, it gives so much back to you, since when you then sit there and you're surrounded by people you like to work with, and you're really able to do what you're passionate about and what you're burning for, it's really great feeling. And so it always balancing it out all the time, right? So sometimes you're really like, oh, why have I started this? Why am I doing this? I really do not know how to get out of this hole. And then on the other side, you have a drink in the evening, you are surrounded by your employees and all friends most of the time also you're working with, and you're damn proud of yourself, and the other people, what you realize and what you're working on. So I think this is one thing I realized. It's really a life of extremes, so positive as well as negative. And one thing, and I think maybe the other can subscribe this, I have underestimated how important it is to really support communication within the company. So I think one of the most important points where I'm working on is that everyone understands each other, and that everyone knows in what direction we are walking, and what is the big picture. Since this is really not as easy to communicate over, particularly if you grow and you become more people, that you really have everyone on board and that everyone understands what is the big picture, what is the vision, where you move to. I think that's one of the most important tasks, and I totally underestimated it when I started, that communication between people and between teams is so important. Yeah.
Thank you for your candor, and I think well received, and I'm sure everyone here values this skill set within their everyday life and their work. So really resonated with me as well. Ezel?
Yeah, I mean, echo what Simon's saying, right? I feel like probably if you took my genome in the last 6 years, it's the most heavily evolved, I think, because just in terms of the ups and downs of what comes your way and how you have to adapt and learn quickly. I think, kind of the challenge and the gratification in terms of being an entrepreneur in the technology space is that there's always something new that you're learning. But once you get past that, it's also extremely gratifying, right, in terms of the next challenge and the next challenge. So definitely here the ups and downs, as long as it's headed in the upward direction, it's good. The other thing that I think I really enjoy about doing this is just working with the people in the space in terms of, we see a lot of, so String, as I said, it's in the biotech ecosystem. And there are not too many places where people get to start off very early in their career in a technology-driven startup like us. So we work very closely with a lot of colleges and see young women come in and really enthusiastic about starting off in the workforce. That's actually quite gratifying to see. But at the other end of the value spectrum is also, the sad reality is that as they progress, they're not able to stay on. And perhaps that's the other challenge that we have to figure out how to overcome, I think, as an ecosystem together.
Yeah, well heard as well. Devlina?
Yes. So in my case, from given the background of, where I come from, I have been a techie the most part of my life. So my initial challenges was to really wake up to the business-centric entrepreneurship, the business-centric goals that a typically company, running a company comes with on a day-to-day basis. So everything else came pretty easy to me. Developing a product came pretty simple to me. But to really understand how a business model works, something that I really had to adapt and learn and sharpen my skill set. The second thing is, since the sector we work with are fisheries, and since we use space data, and both of them are considered very risky, we in the very early stage realize that we really have to come up with a viable business model. Otherwise, it is very difficult to secure, even forget about funding, secure proper response from the market. So really going to that extent, having user interviews, having a lot of market research, thing that we had to do. And that was also, the part that we do enjoy at this moment, because that keeps us connected to the community we work with, and we see instant result of what we are building. And that's the simple pleasures we draw from our everyday activities. What I'm currently doing in coastal Karnataka is coastal Maharashtra is actually the same thing. So that's what keeps us going, seeing that a remote community is getting benefited from something that you're coding. And the benefit is not only for a one day, but for their extended livelihoods.
That's very inspiring. And I think the community aspect of things is also something that will resonate, whether it's a community that you're building in terms of your workforce, or whether it's a community that you're impacting in terms of your end users, and indeed, in your case, the community that you're serving. Anjali?
So, see, entrepreneurship is a journey, and you have to do it because you're doing it out of choice. So I will use a Hindi phrase, "Okhli mein sar dala to musal se kya darna," which means when you put your head in the mortar, why fear the pestle? And consequently, it's all about staying positive. You'll have lots of people saying it can't work, but you will also have lots of people saying, "Great idea, it can work." Choose to listen to the yay-sayers versus the naysayers. So that's one thing. Second, and so that it requires enormous amounts of persistence and tenacity and obviously courage to even start. Second is surround yourself with people who are well-wishers and the yay-sayers. So have more of them versus less of them. And what gives energy is, in the investing and the entrepreneurship business, it's all about ideas and people. So great ideas and great people. It's all about the people.
Thanks. And while I have you here, I might ask you to come in on one more question, and then I'll turn it over to Raman. Anjali, the work that you're doing at Avana really flips the question on challenges or constraints for women entrepreneurs on its head, right? So my question is actually very simple. Like, where is the opportunity, and why should women entrepreneurs be invested in?
So why should women entrepreneurs be
invested in, and yeah.
I think very simply, women, and I'm going to quote RBG on this, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, women have to be everywhere where decisions are being taken. And entrepreneurship is where growth comes from, whether it is large companies or small companies or grassroots level entrepreneurs. That's where decisions are taken, both in terms of capital allocation as well as innovation. So women absolutely have to be in entrepreneurship. And as a society and as an ecosystem for growth and innovation, we have to support our women entrepreneurs like we support all entrepreneurs. And Shalaka, you mentioned this, and it was actually quite disturbing to see how India has slid down in the participation of women in the workforce. And for a young society like ours, where we know we require 12 million jobs a year to just keep up with the growth in our youth demographic, not all of those will come from jobs. A lot of that has to come from livelihood creation, self-employment, or entrepreneurship. So they're all very powerful reasons for us collectively to support women entrepreneurs, and for women to not give up on entrepreneurship and claim their fair share.
Indeed, and I think there's evidence that works well. I'm going to turn over to Raman, who really, I think, is going to bring the ecosystem perspective to the remainder of this discussion. Over to you, Raman.
Back on mute. So very insightful points emerging from the dialogue thus far. And I think just picking out on the last one that Anjali started to talk about, and this one is really open to everybody on the panel, is, given the work that all of you are doing across different verticals and different geographies, I think Devlina started a business out of India. Ehil has done startups in the US. Simone has been working in Germany. So maybe you could share some best practices that you have observed in the other sectors and geographies that we could bring to the Indian context in order to hasten the journey of women entrepreneurs in food and ag tech. So no particular order, please go ahead. Ehil, would you like to start?
So two things that I think I see as key differences. One is, let's talk about physical changes that can be made, right, to the ecosystem to have more women. I think we discussed it already. One is financing, right? How to actually get past, how to actually build momentum so that we're not talking about men versus women when it comes to entrepreneurship, how to actually have a more equitable innovation workforce, right? I think financing definitely. And the second kind of infrastructure there is just support systems, right? So, 5 p.m. in the Bay Area, you probably see a lot of parents rushing home to pick up kids from daycare. As I said, in Bangalore, when I moved here, it was really difficult to find a daycare that would engage kids from 8 to 6. So you have to have support system infrastructure to do that. I think the second is probably emotional, right? Emotional is just families expecting women to be part of the workforce. I think that has to happen, whether it's at the higher end or lower end. We say, what's the government scheme is Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, what next, right? Your girl goes to school, then she has to stay in the workforce, right? She can't be married and stay at home. I think so. One is physical infrastructure, what can be done. And second is just the emotional societal change, expecting women to be part of the workforce. I think that's what I would, 2 points, 2 things on that.
Thanks, Ayel. Simone, from your experience building a startup in Germany and operating in India and other parts of the world, what do you see as some of the practices that you believe that could be brought to this space?
I think Isil put it out really good. Particularly the last point is one important thing, right? That society opens in the direction that it becomes something normal. And it is still also here in Germany, we face the same point, right? We really have only a few female entrepreneurs. It's still the same point. Also, if you sit in your board, most of the time, I'm the only woman in this room, right? Since investors are mostly male, old, male, silver hair. So that's the picture you see out there. And I think bit by bit, it gets more and more acceptance in the society. And I think this is really something important. And as Isil said, that it's just normal that women are not staying at home, that they empowered to take risks, that they empowered to be able to make mistakes on the way. And I think that's the most important thing, really, to fight all the time for these change in society. And then, yeah, as you said, it's in the same thing here. It's still hard sometimes to find, if you have kids, to bring them to kindergarten, find a kindergarten place, where it's just like the easiest thing. You need to have the time to do it. It's bit by bit also shifting here, the acceptance that maybe it's not then, if you do not find a place, the woman who stays at home, but rather the men. But it still needs the acceptance in the society that this is all right, also from on the side of on the men's side, and their acceptance, right, that he's the one staying at home, taking care about the kids. So still quite a lot to do, but I think we shouldn't give up and be positive here, since particularly this panel shows that there are the possibilities for this.
Absolutely, and I think more power. I think a couple of things that you highlighted, Simone, about acceptance that mistakes will be made, the empowerment to take risks. I'm going to take this to Anjali. Anjali, as an investor and as somebody who's seen many different perspectives and sectors, where do you see investors looking at women entrepreneurs in terms of recognizing that the risk that they experience, there will be an overlap between what the male counterpart is facing, but however, there'll be others as well. How do the investors look at, what kind of lens do they deploy when they are evaluating investments in women-led businesses?
I can talk about the lens I apply.
Sure, that's a different starting point.
Right. Okay. When I see a woman in business or technology, period, and then I'll take that further into women entrepreneurs. I see someone who is very smart, who is driven, who has overcome odds to be where she is. When I see an entrepreneur, I see even more. I see someone who is brave, who is resourceful, who has an idea, and who's a risk taker. So for me, that's a big plus. Unfortunately, it is not something we are seeing all pervasive across the ecosystem. I mean, just look at this, right? We talked about sliding back on participation of women in the workforce across the board.
Yeah.
And I think there are many, many champions of inclusion of women everywhere, whether it is women entrepreneurs or women in the workforce. And yet somehow we seem to not be able to shift more capital to women entrepreneurs as a system. It's barely 3% of all venture money actually goes to women entrepreneurs or businesses that are led by women. The statistics for the amount of formal credit that goes to small businesses led by women is, I think, similar or worse, if it were. And consequently, I think there is work we have to do as a society, as a financial system, and certainly as an investing system to support, promote, enable, and most of all, overcome our own biases, our own negative biases. I would like to keep my positive bias.
Sure. Well said. And obviously you're right, there is a lot to be done in spreading that perspective that you just shared. And people need to, be reminded every day in the morning, especially investors, that this is what they need to do and be more and more open about, different types of entrepreneurs out there. So I'm going to bring Shalaka in. Shalaka, you have a very unique perspective because you work with a largest investor, and you have a gender lens to it. So maybe you can share your insights and your experiences of this.
Sure, thanks. And actually, let me do that by telling a story of how we've done this in an early stage venture fund, right? So there is, I think, a massive opportunity in terms of why should investors invest more in gender overall. So it's, yes, certainly in women-led businesses, but gender is more than that, right? It's not just financing women entrepreneurs. It's also looking at products and services that are targeted by gender to both men and women. For example, maternity health clinics or sports equipment or what have you, right? So we've done a couple of things as IFC. One is, we do have dedicated financing for women entrepreneurs through a Banking on Women program. So that committed portfolio is about 2.7 billion for SME financing for women. And we work with more than 100 financial institutions globally on that. And since last year, we've committed about more than 50 million in advisory and investment interventions to specifically address gender gaps in private equity financing. So there's two pieces to this, right? Why should we do this? So we actually did a research study that showed that funds that are more gender diverse and allocate capital in specific ways outperform in terms of market returns funds that are not gender diverse. And gender diversity here is defined as 30% of the other gender. So all female funds as well as all male funds wouldn't really qualify as a gender diverse fund. And that is sort of the business case for why, right? Why do you invest using a gender lens? And up to a 20% market return is a pretty compelling answer that for LPs and GPs in particular. And because we were able to demonstrate the business case, then the funds that we work with came to us and said, yeah, great. This is a great idea. The why, we understand it. How do we actually do this? And so we actually just launched, it's a public access toolkit for fund managers on how do you do this? How do you embed a gender lens from due diligence to portfolio management to exits? What does it look like, right? And it's not rocket science. I think, the story that I'd like to tell there is we worked with one of Pakistan's first early stage venture funds. It's called Sarmayakar Ventures. It primarily invests in tech-enabled businesses, both B2B and B2C, right? So now the fund has a portfolio of about 7 diverse companies. It had a lot of interest in sourcing and developing investments in women-led companies, but was finding it a challenge to find these women-owned businesses. So what we did is, in addition to our core investment of 2 million to support startups in Pakistan as for a VC fund, we also brought in blended financing through Women Entrepreneurs Financing Initiative of about 500,000. And so together, this kind of blended finance can catalyze the fund's outreach and financing to early stage, high impact, women owned or women managed tech startups, right? And so I think as a result, the pipeline, which was less than 10%, increased to 42%. And, I think 25% of the total portfolio is going to be commercially viable. So I think making that commitment for investors is important. And Avana has done a great job of, really exemplifying what a gender lens looks like in a commercially viable manner. It is not required to take financial haircuts to apply a gender lens. And there's billions of dollars of capital going towards this. So I'm looking forward to the day that, this conversation becomes one of, this is the norm. It is normal and normalized to invest using a gender lens. And in fact, there's a sense of FOMO of saying, if I don't use a gender lens, then we're going to miss out on some pretty stunning returns, right? So hopefully that will be a conversation that we'll have not too long in the future.
Oh, absolutely. This is great stuff, and I do hope that a lot of people are listening in or will view the recording later and recognize that there are these tools available out there to actually make this happen. And like you said, Shalaka, it's not rocket science. It's just about keeping an open mind on pretty much all the opportunities out there and assessing them for what their worth is, rather than who's the jockey and what is the horse and all those kind of things. I'm going to bring in Devleena. Devleena, I hope your connectivity is better. What has been your experience, talking to funders and others in terms of looking at the business that you're trying to build, the tech-based business on the fishery side?
Yeah, so I'm hoping you guys can hear me, testing it again.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Great. So, we have, as I was trying to really say earlier, from the very first day of the business, we have really focused on bootstrapping the company, not depending on external funding. And this was essential to prove the fact that, space-based businesses and space-based data businesses and the fisheries sector is a viable model. So we had to prove it ourselves, and then we can prove it to the investors and prove it to the community at large. So that has been the drive in the company throughout. So raising funding is something that we have not really tackled with till date. We are profitable, so that way we have been, we are happy that way. But I would say, just to address the couple of points mentioned by the other panelists, and I think most of them has been covered. But two things that we typically find in the gender gap, at least to the community that we work with, the way it is designed, we have a biasness in the design. I'll give an example. There has been a government scheme where they gave out cycles and bicycles for rural fishermen to go and sell it to the market, but all the bicycles were for men. Where you typically see that the women travel too to sell fish. So there's a technological bias and the design biasness. The second thing is also that we found, and it is proven, that 68% of group loans given to fisher folks which have women in them has more success stories to say. But we don't take any learnings from that. We keep on seeing such collective, a mention of collective is mostly focused to men-only groups. So if we can really, take all those data points in consideration, we can have this technology biasness or any design biasness removed and have more such financial inclusion for the women in concern. And that was for the rural folks. For me as an individual, I believe I have had the privilege of really having support, my team supporting me or my mentor supporting me that way. So I don't really have any horror stories to really share. But I believe for the rural population we represent, there are many more things and plenty more things that can be done.
Thanks, Devleena. It's heartening to hear about the positive outcomes that you've been experiencing. Just picking up on the point that Devleena mentioned, in terms of ecosystem support, mentoring is a very classic tool that is being used. Well, earlier it used to be within corporate, and over the last 20 years, I guess mentoring has now become an external piece. What has been the experience, Simone? Maybe you can come in here in terms of finding mentors who could, help you through those mistakes, the risks that you are taking as a business, as a woman entrepreneur. What's been the ecosystem support that you've got there, and where do you think it could be built on?
I think it might be not really real mentorship, but what helped me a lot was always, first of all, we were 7 founders who founded the company. So just having the possibility to always know you have close people around you you can trust, and you can discuss everything with, is a really important point, I think. I never could think of making something on my own without having peers around me doing the same. And then I think what also really helps a lot is, if you grow a little bit, that you exchange with other CEOs from other companies, right? In the end, all the companies go through the same problems, to the same questions they ask themselves, to the same or similar experience. And this also helped me a lot, just talking to other CEOs from other companies. Maybe they are already a little bit further down the line. So really hearing from them their perspectives, and maybe even totally different characters than myself, because then you also get another point of view on topics, right? And you open up your vision in terms of how do you tackle a problem. I think that was most important mentoring from my side. I can't say that I have one specific person during the time where I always reach out to. I mean, on the investor side, it's also good you have one maybe who knows you a little bit better, where you can ask your stupid questions, where you don't feel embarrassed if you ask really easy questions, which you have to solve for yourself, but you haven't done before. Yeah, but the peers around me were most who gave me trust and mentoring during the time.
And Simone, any difference between, let's say, if you were to get mentoring advice from your peer group, whether it's a man or a woman, any difference that you found? Or would you say, I wish there were more of this type and less of this type?
I'm on the Valina side. I had really good experience also talking to men, but yes, there are some points which you're not talking about with the men, but rather you like to address this topic with the female. Pretty sure. I mean, yes, that's true. But I think that also holds true for both sides. Again, what we had before, that we can't only talk about when we talk about gender, we will have the same on the men's side as well. And I really believe in the mixture of men and women in things, that what really brings us forward, and not saying it has to be only female or it has to be only men. I think the diversity is the most important in this.
Sure. I'm just going to bring Anjali in as an investor perspective. Anjali, what has been your experience on mentoring and providing that kind of support, or the larger ecosystem, wider ecosystem on that?
Sure. The mentoring, I think all of us, I particularly owe a lot in my professional career journey, the learning, the growth, the opportunities to mentors and sponsors. So cannot underscore enough the importance of having a circle of mentors and sponsors throughout, regardless of what you do as an entrepreneur, as an investor. And investing itself is fairly entrepreneurial. You have to make judgment calls all the time. It can be quite sort of solitary and lonely. So you do need your team, and you do need people externally as well. On the men versus women, I think for a lot of people, my generation, there were very few women in any case that you could look up to as role models or as mentors. So most of our mentors, champions, and sponsors were men, are men. And I will urge women to not think about it with a gender lens either. Remain gender blind. There are some wonderful people out there who actually want to help. And they want to help, they want to mentor, they'll give advice. So reach out without thinking whether it's a man or a woman. I do agree with Simone that there are certain issues. And issues are really when people are speaking from personal experience, trade-offs and choices that young women have to make, particularly in those years when they're going through having children and raising families and so on. And at that time, it's probably easier and more useful to talk to a woman who can give you some personal experience versus theory. But at the same time, I think there are mentors at home as well. Balanced workplaces will not become real until we have balanced households.
Sure, sure. No, very well put, Anjali. Ale, I'm going to come to you on this one. What's been your experience? I know you've raised a bunch of money in the recent past. What's been the kind of experience you've had with investors, with people who've been kind of offering you support and guidance in building your business?
Yeah. So I have to say, I've had some really, really good mentors, just helping, supporting, showing the way, pretty much from the time I've entered the workforce through the entrepreneurship and uh, either from my end or their end, I haven't really made a distinction in terms of men versus women. I have to say men have been extremely supportive, and gone out of their way to support, help, offer advice. I would say that, one of the first person to push me into the entrepreneurship journey was actually a professor of mine who was a woman at Caltech. And I would not have made the jump if not for her, because she was one of the first who said, you're young, if you don't take the risk now, when will you take this jump? So I do but I've been fairly gender blind in terms of folks who are mentors and who've been with us or with me along the journey. And actually, I have to say that's been one of the big surprises for me in the Indian ecosystem, is that I do find that there are a lot of men in the Indian ecosystem who are extremely supportive of women making the jump and being entrepreneurs in this space. So I think Anjali put it really well. I think to have a balanced workforce, we need to have a balanced household. So perhaps figuring out how to make that happen could be one way forward. But yeah, when it comes to mentors, I've had very good support from both men and women.
That's very heartening, Gail. I'm going to hand it over to Shalaka for the next question. And I think we've got some questions on the chat box. So over to you, Shalaka.
Yeah, and this actually connects to one of the questions in the chat box, right? So agriculture both contributes to and will be fundamentally affected by climate change. And, gender and climate are two big drivers, I think, in my everyday life at the IFC. So the question is, how can the adoption and diffusion of disruptive technology and precision agriculture into agtech business model, like what kind of promise does it hold for addressing these challenges? Open question if anybody would like to take that.
If I can come in, Shalaka, and I'm
Sure.
hoping I'm audible.
Yes, Devlina.
All right. So speaking about climate change, and as I was trying to highlight it before, for the fishery sector, we have seen little or no innovation happening in the fishery sector. And what I mean by that you really don't have to push the AI and ML to really bring about any kind of climate resilience for these folks. So when we started working in this sector, we had to had, deep, engaging customer research where we understood on a daily basis what is really affecting them. While they're out in the sea, while they're back in the land, what are the factors that affects their daily trade? What are the factors that affect their daily profitability? And what are the factors that affect that extended, financial inclusion or financial profitability, be of loans, micro insurances. So that is kind of, it is a user-centric design that we had to build. So in terms of technology, then the technology parameters comes into view. So if it's a set of questions that you really have to answer, first you list the questions and then you say, okay, what technology parameters can be brought in, while keeping in mind that the users in your case are able to use the technology without much, your help. So they should be able to use it on a daily basis, and they should be very familiar on what is the technology helping them do. So just one more point in that case is, while we are designing the user interface, we also dig down on what app or what mobile app they are very familiar with. And it turns out that across 4 countries that we did some research, Uber and Ola are the most used mobile apps, and they're very used to that kind of interface. So we make sure that our app, the OFish app that we provide to the Fisher folks around that kind of a user experience. So all of this is very vital. So technology, I would say, comes later. First, doing an user-centric approach to design and to the problem at hand is something that it starts with. That's the first thing that you need to do. In case of purely talking about technology tools, we have seen precision farming affecting or helping agriculture, and similar in the case of our fisheries case, we see space data coming into help. We see availability of transaction monitoring coming to help. We put applicable of blockchain to drive transparency and traceability in the seafood supply chain.
Fascinating, and thanks for making the connection between, I think, technologies that already have strong user interfaces. In this case, you're talking about ride-hailing, another area where, as IFC, we've been doing a lot of work. But that's a story for another day. I think for the story for today, this journey from farm to fish to fund, which sounds like a Silicon Valley restaurant, but it's been very deeply insightful for me. I've really enjoyed it. I'm going to turn over to Raman to take us through sort of the what next, right? I think. Go ahead, Anjali.
I have to, Shalaka, I'm compelled to say this. Farm to fish to fund is maybe the next entrepreneurial venture. Someone will do it either in our own Silicon Valley in Bangalore or in Palo Alto or Texas, Austin now.
Well, that or it's going to be a very successful restaurant name. It could also be that. So.
It could also be that.
Thanks, Anjali. I think, yeah, so, I'd like to invite Raman in because I think one of the most powerful things of the platform that ThinkAg is and has convened within the startup ecosystem is its ability to take the rich insights that are generated from conversations like this. And deep thanks and much gratitude to all of you for inviting me to join it and participate in it. But the power of the platform of ThinkAg is really what happens next. And so over to you, Raman, to have the last word on where we go from here.
Thanks, Shalaka. Definitely not the last word. It's among the early words. There's no way the last word on this one. But it's been an amazing conversation, and we definitely intend to build on this. I think one of the questions that I would like to ask everybody, including you, Shalaka, and if we were to have this kind of a conversation sometime down the road, 3 years, 5 years down the road, what is it, that roll back the future for us? What do you think this conversation would sound like? What would be some of the themes that we would look at, maybe 3 to 5 years down the road? So please, any particular order, please go ahead and respond. And also, by the way, this will be a to-do list for us at ThinkAg, because we are not looking at the here and now. We are looking at the next 3 to 5 years, and some of these things will make an impact only in that. So Simone, I know you have to leave for your board meeting, so please do come in and start. Over to you, Simone.
I think my perfect world would be that, of course, we do not have these conversations any longer, right? It's just normal that when, for example, I step into a corporate management meeting, that I'm not the only woman on the table, but it's just equal, and no one is wondering, and no one has to say positive words about it that it is equal, right? It's just like normal thing. And the same that it's also, this is maybe not on the gender perspective, but maybe more on the digital perspective, that it also becomes normal that people use ICT tools for something, or take them as something supportive. It's integrated in their daily life, and they can just leverage all the things out of what ICT tools can bring to them. And thanks for having me here, I have to say. It was really encouraging conversation, and also see what's happening on everyone else's table and plate. And I would say goodbye now, because I really have to jump and go into the board meeting.
Thanks, Simone. Thanks for joining us.
Bye-bye.
It's been great. I'm happy to go next. I think
Sure.
the perspective of the investor hat, to me, the what I'd like to see happen in the future is more deployment of capital towards all of the solutions that we've talked about, right? And so I think the quantum of capital that needs to go into entrepreneurship overall, not just into women-led businesses, the quantum of capital in terms of the structure, blended finance solutions, just more risk appetite with the providers of capital going to some of the solutions that we've been highlighting. So hopefully 5 years out, there will be a lot more capital that has been deployed in terms of solutions that have gender very much at its heart. And then echoing what we've been talking about so far, where it moves from the fringes of farm or fish or fund and really all comes together very much as a mainstream conversation and very much becomes sort of a normalized way of doing things.
No, that makes a lot of sense, Shalaka. And just building on that, maybe Anjali, you can share what you see as a vision or what you see 3 years, 5 years down the road.
I'd love to see, and I'm echoing what has been said by Simona and by Shalaka, where when we talk about diversity, we are actually not referring to 50% of the world's population. And that ceases to be a diversity and inclusion discussion because it's normal. And in agriculture, particularly, I think more efficient supply chains, more income in the hands of farmers, better quality food, which is both timeliness as well as quality going from farm to fork. And then globally, I think a real impact on climate and sustainability. And then all the technologies, whether it's digital or other technologies or the kind of work that Azul is doing and others that will support these outcomes.
Sure. No, makes a lot of sense. And then the moment we address the first one, I think a lot of others will probably get addressed better and faster. Azul, your thoughts?
So from my end, being in the food space, I think in 5 years, if we could be talking about how do we actually enable food production, but by lowering the environmental toll that we're having today. Because surprisingly, agriculture is one of the key contributors to climate and climate impact. So perhaps we are talking about innovation really having had better inroads into the active space in India, and where we are seeing solutions in place that are increasing agri productivity, but perhaps with a lesser toll. That's on the technology side. On the women's side itself, I think, I agree. If we could be talking about why aren't women taking bolder bets when it comes to entrepreneurship, if that could be the level of conversation 5 years from now, I think that would be a big win. We would have moved past, talking about the basics being in place and really being able to elevate the conversation to the next level, I think.
No, that's very well put. I think there is a lot to do there. Devlina, are you okay with your connection? Would you like to comment with your thoughts on where this women and entrepreneurs conversation would come in? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So from the technology perspective, what we are working towards is the sustainability and traceability of the seafood supply chain. I would definitely see that dialogue, extending to the part that we really don't have to, introduce the concept of sustainability to fisher folks across the world. They should know that, sustainable fishing is the way to go. The fact that traceability is needed so that there is a cyclical economy that can, drive a fair trade model is what we are working towards. So all of that should be, we don't really have to have this educative dialogues in every society that we go, or every state that we go, every country that people should be aware of it. So that's what we really are looking forward to from the technology perspective. A few other things is the safety of fishermen in the sea, where we have seen very little innovation in the marine sector, and so developing some products. So we're hoping that will be a standard. From the women, women aspect of is the inclusion of them in the finance, having more women, financial products for the women-led businesses. having women safety workplaces, especially in the rural sector, where they are being able to work comfortably in a big supply chain, in a big factory. Address, we see some kind of help to the women folks in the urban cities where there are health cares and child cares, but we don't really see it in the rural sector. So those things can be really thought about and brought in. So yeah, that's more or less what I would really like to see in the next 5 years.
Thanks. I being the male member on this panel, what I'm picking up from each one of you, and please correct me and if there are biases built in, is that I think all of you are saying that if you're able to address the larger problems and obviously find solutions to them which are compatible, we should be able to address the issues, the discussions around gender. I look at it differently, saying that the role of gender is very significant in addressing the larger problems, and people are not recognizing that. I think that's a conversation that needs to go deeper, and I think we need to take that message across to many people. And I think the idea of risk management and the way risk needs to be dealt with, and actually deploying more capital in this space are all in the right direction. So I think we are bang on time. Thank you, everybody, for a very enriching conversation. Thanks, Anjali, Devlina, Ail, and my co-host Shalaka, and obviously Simone, who could not stay till the end. But this has been a wonderful discussion. We will definitely be in touch with all of you, and we hope that we will have a wider panel as we go along, and the conversation moves away from just pure gender, but to discuss about problem resolution and picking up different perspectives and then making them happen. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for your time today afternoon. Have a good day and a good evening ahead. Thank you.
Thanks, Raman. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
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 Thank you all.
Bye.